The trauma bay doors at Hargrove Memorial opened the way they always opened at 11:47 on a Tuesday in November, without warning, without ceremony, just cold air and the sound of wheels against linoleum and voices overlapping in the controlled urgency of people who had trained their fear into something functional. The man on the gurney did not look like a man who should be breathing. He was broad-shouldered, somewhere around 55, silver at the temples, jaw set even in unconsciousness with the look of someone who had never once considered surrender as a viable option. His shirt had been cut away. Beneath it, the entry wounds had already been counted, and the count had already stopped making sense. 20 of them. Chest, abdomen, one through the left side that had no business being survivable under any known medical framework. And yet the body was still moving, not breathing in any rhythm that registered as life, but the chest was rising. The fingers were curling and uncurling at irregular intervals. The legs pushed against nothing, as if some deep interior mechanism had not received the message that it was supposed to stop. Dr. Samuel Holt arrived 30 seconds after the gurney did. He was 61 years old, had practiced emergency medicine for 32 of those years, and had long since lost the capacity for surprise at the ways human beings manage to damage themselves. He looked at the vitals. He looked at the wounds. He looked at the preliminary blood work the paramedic shoved into his hand and held for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, without drama, "This man is gone." The room accepted this. Rooms accepted Samuel Holt. He carried the kind of authority built not from volume, but from accumulated weight. 3 decades of decisions made under pressure, of knowing when a fight was finished before the body admitted it. Nurses stepped back. Monitors continued their meaningless reporting. Someone reached for the protocol clipboard. Then a voice said, "Move." Not loud at all. Mara, working under the name Claire Voss, was already gloved. She was 32, dark hair pulled back with the efficiency of someone for whom loose ends were not an aesthetic choice, but a liability. 11 months on staff at Hargrove Memorial. In those 11 months she had been described by different colleagues in ways that didn't resolve into a single coherent picture, precise, quiet, unsettling, gifted. The kind of nurse you wanted in the room and weren't entirely sure you wanted in the building. No family on her emergency contact form. No social media anyone had ever located. Same lunch every day, eaten standing at the nursing station while reading literature she wasn't required to read. Never rattled, not once. She crossed the trauma bay, and the staff moved for her the way people move for someone who has made a decision the room hasn't caught up to yet. Holt said, "Nurse Voss, I've called it." She said, You called it too early." She was already at the bedside. Her hands moved across the patient's chest, not with desperate energy, but with the deliberate precision of someone following a map no one else in the room could read. 2 fingers pressed to a point just below the sternum, lateral, angled downward, applied with calibrated force. Not a standard pressure point, not anything taught in nursing school, not anything in the textbooks behind the nursing station. The monitor changed, not the flat line of death. The jagged arrhythmic spike of something trying. "His coagulation is failing," she said, without looking up. "He's not hemorrhaging the way you think. The bleed pattern is wrong. His blood isn't moving through standard pathways. There's a suppressant in his chemistry, something fighting his own biology." Holt came closer. "What are you talking about? Look at the tissue around each wound." Her voice was level, not urgent, certain. "It's contracting. His body is trying to close itself. Something is interfering with that process." She looked up at him directly. "Help me anyway." 3 seconds of silence. In a trauma bay, 3 seconds is its own kind of eternity. Holt looked at the monitors, looked at the wounds, looked at the woman across from him with steady hands and eyes that asked for cooperation, not permission. He made a decision that would mark the rest of his career. "What do you need?" What followed was 40 minutes that no one in that trauma bay would describe the same way twice. The attending surgeon arrived 8 minutes in, looked at what Mara was doing, opened his mouth. Holt stopped him at the door with a hand on the chest and a look that ended the conversation. Mara worked. She drew 2 vials from the lower drawer of the crash cart. Not labeled, not standard issue, not from any hospital pharmacy. She had placed them there on her 3rd day of employment, in a drawer she checked every morning since, the way a soldier checks a weapon before a patrol she hopes will be uneventful. The anesthesiologist said, "What is that?" She said, "Something that works." She pushed the needle in with the calm of someone who had done this exact thing before, in a place louder than this room, where the stakes were higher and the equipment was worse and there was no one standing beside her asking questions. The monitor changed, not immediately, not with cinematic timing, but gradually and then suddenly. A pattern emerging from noise, a rhythm finding itself inside chaos. The surgeon, still in the doorway, said quietly, "His pressure is climbing." By 1 in the morning, the patient had a pulse. By 2, a blood pressure that could be called survivable. By 3, the surgeon had stopped standing in the doorway and had started helping, because some things override professional pride when you watch them happening in real time. By 4 in the morning, Dorian Kane was alive. Mara went to restock the supply cabinet. There were 8 other patients who needed her before the night was over. The morning arrived with coffee and consequences. The story moved through the hospital faster than it should have, louder than intended, gathering detail and distortion in equal measure. 9 critical patients. 1 night. 1 nurse. The chief of medicine read the incident report twice before his coffee was finished, and a 3rd time after. At 8:14, 2 black SUVs pulled into the ambulance bay. The men who stepped out wore suits too well pressed for a hospital visit and moved with the contained efficiency of people who had trained urgency out of themselves. Federal badges. Hargrove Memorial hadn't seen federal badges in 11 years. The taller man walked to the front desk and asked for Claire Voss by name. His name was Harlan Webb, 58 years old, with a slight hitch in his left stride he'd carried since 2004, when a piece of metal the size of a thumbnail had rearranged itself inside his hip during a street clearance in Fallujah. Doctors had recommended surgery twice. He had declined twice. He had decided some things you carry and some things you remove, and this particular piece of metal had become, over the years, a kind of evidence, a reminder that ground could give way without warning. Gulf War veteran before he was FBI. He had been many things before he was the man standing in the lobby of Hargrove Memorial, holding a file that had taken 19 years to get close enough to touch. His partner, Dana Kroll, was 34 and believed in systems with the conviction of someone who had not yet watched one fail the people who trusted it. Webb didn't hold this against her. He had believed that way once, too. They found Mara in the break room, sitting with untouched coffee, still in her scrubs, hands flat on the table with the stillness of someone who has been expecting company. She looked at Webb when he came through the door. He looked at her. There was a moment, less than a second, when 2 people shaped by the same kinds of forces recognized that fact in each other without a word exchanged. He sat across from her. Kroll stood near the door. 9 patients last night, he said. That's what the shift report says. The man with 20 gunshot wounds. He's stable. Webb opened his folder, looked at it, then at her. You used techniques outside any civilian medical protocol we could find. You administered substances not in Hargrove's pharmacy inventory. You overrode a death call from the attending physician. A pause. We're not here to charge you. We want to understand. I did what needed to be done. Where did you learn to do it? Experience. From where? Places where there wasn't time to consult a textbook, Kroll said. The patient, Dorian Kane, do you know who he is? Mara said nothing. He's flagged in federal systems, not criminal, more complicated than that. Kroll glanced at Webb. He was targeted. The shooting wasn't random. Someone wanted him dead very specifically, using very specific ammunition. She let that settle. Silver. Webb watched Mara's face with 30 years of precision behind his eyes. He could read the difference between a person hearing news for the first time and a person receiving confirmation of something they already knew. Mara was receiving confirmation. "We ran your prints 3 times, Webb said. Nothing. No record, no history, no existence before 2013. He closed the folder. "So we tried facial recognition against military personnel databases, restricted access." He slid a piece of paper across the table. She looked at it, didn't pick it up, didn't need to. It read, "Corpsman Mara Raines, Fleet Marine Force, medical attachment to Special Operations Support. Status, killed in action. Iraq. March 14th, 2011. Below that, stamped in red ink, faded but not gone. Project Duskfall. Clearance, black. Webb said quietly, "Mara." The room held that name for a moment. She looked up at him, not with fear, not with performed innocence, but with the exhaustion of someone who has carried something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told they no longer have to pretend it isn't there. She said, "How long have you known about Duskfall?" Webb paused. Something shifted in his face, something careful and old. "Long enough," he said. In the room down the hall, behind 2 secured doors, Dorian Kane opened his eyes for the first time since they had brought him in. He stared at the ceiling. Then he turned his head toward the door, as if he could see through it, past the hallway, past the break room, past the federal agents with their folders. His lips moved. If anyone had been there to hear it, they would have heard a name, not Claire. The other name, Mara. He said it the way a man says something he has carried for 12 years, not with surprise, with the absolute certainty of a debt that has finally come due. Mid-morning at Hargrove Memorial carried a sound unlike the chaos that preceded it. Not emergency. Not the controlled urgency of decisions made under bad lighting. Something closer to aftermath. Machinery doing its quiet work. The low exchange of shift notes. The specific atmosphere of a building that had spent the night at the edge of something and was pulling back toward ordinary. Mara was not pulling back toward ordinary. Webb had left 30 minutes ago with Kroll and a folder and more questions in his eyes than he had asked aloud. He had told her not to leave the hospital. He said it the way men say things they know will be ignored, not as a command, but as a record. She was still there when the orderly knocked and told her the patient in room 4 was asking for her. Not for a nurse, for her. By name, not Claire. The other name. The room was dim, blinds adjusted to admit the minimum of November light. Gray, uncommitted, the kind that doesn't illuminate so much as acknowledge the sun's existence somewhere else. The monitors registered everything without investment, numbers moving with the discipline of machines that have no stake in outcomes. Dorian Kane was sitting up. This alone should not have been possible. A man with 20 entry wounds, stabilized less than 10 hours ago after clinical death, had no medical business being upright. And yet he was. Not easily. The effort was written across his face, through the set of his shoulders, in the way his hands gripped the bed rail with the controlled tension of someone managing pain through long practice rather than medication. He was older up close, not old. The distinction mattered. He had the face of a man who had spent considerable time in climates that were not gentle, making decisions that were not small. The lines around his eyes didn't come from laughter or sun. They came from watching. From the attention a person develops when missing something costs lives. He looked at Mara when she came through the door and said nothing for a moment. Then, "You haven't changed." She stopped inside the doorway. "We've never met." "No, but I've seen a photograph. Eli kept one, inside the back cover of the field medical manual he carried everywhere." A pause. "He said you were the reason he learned to be careful, because he had something worth coming home to." Mara came the rest of the way in and stood beside the bed and felt the specific vertigo of a truth arriving before you are ready for it. She said, "Tell me." He spoke without theater, flat. The manner of a man reporting facts held for a long time with no one to give them to. He had been present the night Eli died. Not as a combatant, not as a target, as something harder to explain. A figure who existed at the margins of Project Duskfall under protocols with no official name, no paper trail, no congressional oversight. He had been watching when Eli found the files, not enemy intelligence, not classified mission data. Procurement records, routed through shell accounts, documenting the systematic collection and transfer of biological material, blood, tissue, extracted under conditions described in the clean, neutral language of logistics, which meant in plain terms that the people running Duskfall had been taking from the beings in their custody far more than information. They had been selling what they took, to buyers whose names appeared as alphanumeric codes, whose payments moved through financial structures so layered they had the architectural quality of something built to outlast the people who built it. Eli had read the files in 40 minutes at a forward operating base in a city that no longer existed under that name. He had understood immediately what they meant. He had understood something else, too. He knew what would happen when he reported it, Dorian said. He wasn't naive. He had been in the program long enough to understand how it protected itself. He knew the moment he put his name on a disclosure, he became a problem the program would solve. Mara's hands were at her sides, very still. He said to me, Dorian stopped, looked at the window, back. He said, "She doesn't know any of this, and she can't, not yet. Not until there's something real to give her, something that means it wasn't just." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Mara's voice came out very quiet. He told me it was a routine resupply. That's what the report said. Routine resupply. Ambush. No survivors. There was no ambush, Dorian said. Somewhere down the hall, a cart moved past the door. The building continued its ordinary work, unaware of what was happening in this room. Thane ordered it, Dorian said. Commander Victor Thane. He signed the operational note himself. 4 words. Handle the Rains situation. He held that in the air. Eli was the situation. Mara sat down in the chair beside the bed. Not a choice. Her legs made the decision independently. 12 years of a carefully maintained explanation, ambush, no survivors, the brutal randomness of a war that took people without reason, quietly disassembled itself, replaced not with chaos, but with something almost worse, something with a shape, a name, a signature. She said Thane was his mentor. Yes. Eli trusted him completely. Yes. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had kept Dorian alive the night before, the same hands that had kept 9 people alive while the rest of the hospital watched and didn't understand what it was watching. She said, "You've been carrying this for 12 years. He asked me to find you. He knew I would survive. He knew I would look." Something moved through Dorian's expression. Not grief exactly, not guilt, but the weight of a promise made in someone's last moments. "It took longer than it should have. You were very well hidden. I had help. Good help." A pause. Not good enough in the end. She looked at him directly. "Who else knows you're here?" "The people who shot me." He reached under the edge of the mattress, a position he had chosen when they first brought him in while he still had enough consciousness to choose, and produced a flash drive. Small. Military issue. Battered at one edge from years of being carried against a body that healed everything except what it was carrying. He held it out. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. "Eli put this in my hand the night he died," Dorian said. He said, "If she's still out there, she'll know what to do with it." Mara closed her fingers around the drive, put it in her jacket pocket. Some things don't require a response. They require a witness and a decision about what comes next. She stood. "Rest." He almost smiled. "I've been resting for 12 years. Then a few more hours won't damage you." She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, didn't turn around. "Thank you for finding me." She left before he could answer. The call came at 9:47 that evening, not to Mara's phone, but to the nursing station, logged as a personal message, passed along by an overnight clerk who thought nothing of it. 3 words from an unregistered number. He is coming. Mara read the message and didn't react visibly. She finished the medication round she was in the middle of with the same precision she brought to everything. Checked each patient. Logged each chart. Did every small thing the shift required, because moments just before difficulty are exactly the wrong moments to stop doing the small things. She was pulling on her jacket in the locker room when the door opened. Harlan Webb. Alone this time. No folder, no Kroll, no professional packaging. He had the look of a man who had spent the afternoon making unauthorized decisions and had reached a conclusion he hadn't been sent to reach. He sat on the bench without being invited, looked at the floor. "I lost someone to duskfall," he said. 2004. His name was Robert Caulfield, military intelligence attached to a special operations medical unit. He called me 6 days before he died to say he had found something that would cost him his job. I told him to be careful. 3 days later, he was listed as killed in a vehicle accident outside Ramadi. Webb's jaw tightened. There was no accident. I spent 8 months trying to prove it. Every thread went to nothing. Every door I opened was already empty. Mara said nothing. I've been requesting reassignment to any Duskfall adjacent case for 19 years, he said. Every year. Denied every year. This morning was the first yes. He looked up at her. I don't know if someone made a mistake or if they wanted me close enough to manage. Either way, I'm here, and I'm done being managed. She said, the flash drive. He nodded. Whatever's on it, operational records, financial transfers, names, it becomes a fact once it's in federal custody. Facts have consequences that even powerful people can't fully control. He met her eyes. I want you to know what you'd be handing over before you hand it over. I know what I'm handing over. Then I want you to know something else. He paused. I have been sitting on the wrong side of this thing for 19 years. That's not something I can fix. But I'm done sitting on it. Outside the hospital, across the street and 1 block west, a dark van sat with its engine running. Mara saw it when she stepped through the side exit 40 minutes later, registered it not by looking directly, but by the peripheral awareness of a mind trained to map spaces before entering them. The van's position, the angle, the fact that it hadn't moved in the 40 minutes since she'd first noticed it from the second-floor window. She kept walking. Same pace. The van's side door opened. 2 men stepped out, clean cut. Economical in their movements, the trained efficiency of people for whom nothing was wasted. One she had never seen. The other she had last seen in a briefing room in 2009 when they both wore a different uniform and answered to the same chain of command. He said, "Ma'am, you need to come with us." She stopped, turned, looked at him the way you look at someone who was once inside the same circle of trust and has since moved outside it. That's what they said last time, Garrett. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. We have a relocation order. It comes from... I know where it comes from. Behind her, the hospital side door opened again. Victor Thane stepped out. 65 years old, earning every year of it in the way certain men do, not by surviving things, but by deciding them. Gray at the temples, posture that had never fully left the military. Eyes that assessed everything with the quiet automation of 4 decades of operational judgment. No weapon, no additional security. Just a cup of coffee and the unhurried ease of a man who believed the situation was already concluded. He stopped 2 feet away. You look well, Mara. Commander, retired 6 years ago. Some things don't retire. He looked at her with something that was almost genuine. I came because you're intelligent enough to understand the geometry before this becomes unmanageable. A slight tilt of the head. Eli was intelligent too. That was the problem. Smart enough to find the wrong thing, not quite smart enough to understand what finding it would cost. The air between them held very still. He trusted you, she said. He did. You killed him. Thane's expression didn't shift. I made a decision between one life and the operational integrity of a program protecting 40 others. In my position with the information I had, he set the coffee down on the concrete barrier with deliberate care. I would make the same decision again. I say that not to be cruel. I say it because it's true. And I think you understand, better than most, that the work we did required those kinds of truths. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket and took out her phone. He looked at it. She said, "I've been recording since you stepped out the door." Something hairline fractured behind his eyes. Not panic, too disciplined for panic, but the first crack in the certainty he had arrived wearing. He reached into his coat and placed a folded document on the barrier. A federal warrant. Your name, your real name, tied to unauthorized medical procedures, misuse of controlled substances, falsification of federal identity records. Prepared this morning. He let it sit. Cooperate with the relocation. Let the Kane situation resolve quietly. This warrant stays in a drawer. She picked it up, read it, set it back down. Eli didn't die in an ambush. No. He died because he tried to do the right thing, and the right thing inconvenienced you. Thane said nothing. I've been hiding for 12 years, she said. Quiet, small, exactly what you needed me to be. She looked at him directly. I'm done being convenient. She turned back toward the hospital entrance. Behind her, Thane said nothing. He picked up his coffee, looked at the warrant on the barrier, looked at the van where Garrett stood waiting for an instruction that no longer had a clear shape. Inside the building, Dorian Kane was already moving. He had disconnected his IV 40 minutes earlier, found his way to the ground floor service corridor by the interior navigation of a man who had spent 412 years moving through spaces that were trying to stop him. One hand against the wall, slow, methodical. Mara came around the corner and stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. Thane is outside, she said. I know. Van. 2 contractors. One I recognize from Duskfall. Exits? 8, 3 unmonitored. She reached into her jacket and took out the flash drive. Small military issue, battered at one edge. She held it out. Take this to Webb. East Loading Bay. I'll give you time. Dorian looked at the drive in her hand. I've been alive for 412 years, he said. I know what you're asking. Then go. He took the drive. Eli gave me this to give to you, he said. Not to give back. I know. She held his eyes. And now I'm giving it to you to finish what he started. That's all either of us were ever asked to do. He went. Mara turned back toward the exit, toward the van and the contractors and the retired commander with his coffee and his warrant and his 40 years of justifications. She walked toward all of it without breaking stride. The east loading bay smelled like diesel and cold concrete, and the particular vacancy of a space that existed only to move things through it. Dorian Kane moved through it at the pace his body would allow, slower than he wanted, faster than any physician would have permitted. And he did not negotiate with the pain because the pain was information, and he had enough information already. The drive was in his left hand, closed tight. He had carried heavier things across longer distances under worse conditions. He had carried the weight of other people's final requests across decades and through circumstances with no names in any currently spoken language. He understood, in a way that most could not, what it meant to be trusted with something that would outlast the person who gave it to you. He called Webb's number from the phone Mara had left in the corridor. His own had not survived whatever preceded his arrival at the hospital. Webb answered on the second ring. East Loading Bay, Dorian said. Come alone. A pause. Are you the patient who disconnected his own IV? Yes. That's medically inadvisable. I've survived worse advice. How far are you? 4 minutes. Make it 3. Webb made it 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He came around the corner of the loading bay with his jacket open and his hands visible, the instinctive display of a man who had spent enough time in volatile situations to know that arriving without visible threat was its own form of communication. He looked at Dorian the way briefed people looked at Dorian Kane, when they saw him for the first time in person. A moment of recalibration, a brief negotiation between what the mind knew and what the eyes were processing. Then Webb moved past it with the efficiency of a man who had decided, sometime in the last several hours, that he was done being surprised by the shape this situation was taking. He looked at the drive in Dorian's hand. "Where is she? Buying time? How much? Enough, if we move." Webb took the drive. He held it for a moment. This small, battered piece of hardware that had traveled from a forward operating base through the hands of a dying man and a 400-year witness to this concrete bay in November with diesel in the air and the city humming its indifferent hum beyond the walls. He put it in his interior jacket pocket. 19 years, he said. Not to Dorian, to something older than both of them. Dorian looked at him. "Then don't waste it." What happened in the next 40 minutes happened in fragments. Mara kept the contractors occupied for 23 minutes through deliberate visibility and movement through the hospital's ground floor, appearing at one exit, retreating, reappearing at another, drawing the search pattern away from the loading bay with the calm of someone who had once been trained for exactly this. She didn't engage. She moved. She created the impression of a woman trying to escape rather than one creating space for something else to happen. Thane understood at the 16-minute mark. She saw it in the shift of his instructions to Garrett, the way the contractor's posture changed from pursuit to containment. Thane had not survived 4 decades of operational work by failing to recognize a decoy. He called off the search. He waited. When Mara came back through the main entrance, walking, not running, he was in the lobby with his hands in his coat pockets. All the mechanisms of consequence he had spent a career assembling were still technically in place. And yet, something in his face had moved, not surrender. Thane didn't do surrender. But the look of a man who has been building a structure around a single justification and has watched the justification begin to fail under the weight placed on it. He said, "It's gone, isn't it?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then, "He was the best field medic I ever trained." It came out differently than everything else he had said, without operational smoothness, without the geometry of a man managing a situation. "I want you to know I understood that. Before." Mara looked at him. "I know," she said. She walked past him toward the elevator. He didn't stop her. Garrett appeared in the lobby doorway with a question in his posture. Thane said, "Stand down." He picked up his coffee from the reception counter. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway, standing in the lobby of a hospital, while somewhere across the city a flash drive moved toward federal custody, and the last operational justification for everything he had built began its quiet, irrevocable dissolution. The federal conference room was designed by someone who believed neutral colors and adequate lighting could make difficult things easier. They couldn't. Overhead fluorescents cast flat, unforgiving light across the table, the chairs, the faces of the people seated around it, and the small digital recorder at the center that had no stake in what it was about to hear. Mara sat on one side, Webb across from her, Kroll at the end with a legal pad, pen moving in disciplined shorthand. Webb pressed record. "Your name?" "Mara Raines, formerly Lance Corporal Mara Raines, Fleet Marine Force Corpsman, attached to Special Operations Medical Support. Currently employed as a registered nurse under the name Claire Voss at Hargrove Memorial Hospital." A breath. "I've been living under a false identity for 12 years. I'd like to explain why." She explained why. Without theater, without self-protection, without the careful, lawyered language of someone managing liability. Chronologically, specifically, the details that mattered, none that didn't. Project Duskfall, its origins as a legitimate battlefield stabilization program, the procurement operation that grew inside it, the financial transfers, the biological material, the buyers embedded in the drive now in a federal evidence bag 3 floors below them. She talked about Eli. She talked about him plainly, which was the hardest way to talk about someone you have lost. not performed grief, but the smaller, more durable version, the one that lives in the specific. The field manual he carried everywhere. The way he double-checked everything twice, not from insecurity, but from the understanding that care was its own form of respect. The last morning, the routine resupply mission that was not a routine resupply mission. The knock on her door 3 days later, the specific weight of the flag they handed her. Kroll had stopped writing somewhere in the middle of this. She was listening. Webb looked at the table, jaw tight. He had known the contours of this story through Robert Caulfield, through his own 19-year accounting, but hearing it from someone who had lived inside it was different. Facts changed when they had a body, when they arrived attached to a person who had carried them through 12 years of deliberate smallness. When Mara finished, the room held itself still. Kroll said quietly, "If this goes public, there will be people who say you broke protocol, that you practiced outside your credentials." Mara looked at her steadily. "There will also be 9 people alive who weren't supposed to be, including a man with 20 bullet wounds who is currently refusing to stay in his hospital bed." She didn't look away. "I'll take that math." Webb reached across and stopped the recorder. "We'll need you on record again, formally, with counsel." He looked at her. "I'm going to make sure this goes where it needs to go. I should have found a way to do that 19 years ago. I didn't. That's mine to carry." He paused. "But today, we move forward." She looked at him. "Eli would have liked you," she said. Webb was quiet a moment. "He sounds like someone worth knowing." He was. The hearing came 11 days later, a closed-door oversight session in a building that smelled like old carpet and institutional coffee, staffers with notepads, senior members who had learned to look grave on short notice. Victor Thane sat at one table with his legal architecture arranged around him. He looked the same as he always looked. Men like Thane did not visibly diminish. They held their shape. Mara sat at the other table, alone, no legal representation by choice, just the recorder and the room and the truth, which she had decided was the only defense worth making. Dorian Kane entered at 9:14 and placed 2 things on the table. First, a journal. Hand-bound, covers worn dark with handling, pages dense with handwriting and ink that varied across the decades of its composition. He had written in it with different pens in different lights in different parts of the world over 37 years. Every operational note, every name, every date, every transaction he had witnessed or been party to, documented with the patience of a man who understood that institutional memory was the first thing power tried to destroy. Second, a phone. He set it beside the journal and pressed play. Thane's own voice filled the room, measured, operational, recorded outside Hargrove Memorial 11 days earlier. "I made a decision between one life and the integrity of a program protecting 40 others. I would make the same decision again." The room went very still. Thane looked at the phone, then at his hands. For the first time since the session had begun, he looked like a man who had run out of architecture. Dorian sat down. He said, "I have been alive for 412 years. I have watched every structure that believed itself permanent discover that it wasn't. I am not here to be extraordinary. I am here because a man named Eli Raines died to put these facts in front of people with the authority to act on them, and I made him a promise they would arrive." He looked at the committee chair. "That is my statement." The session ran 4 hours. Mara spoke for most of it without raising her voice. She spoke in facts and chronology and the patient accumulation of specificity she had learned from the same man who taught her that care was its own form of respect. Thane's legal team objected 4 times. Each objection was entered into the record and overruled. At 4:17 that afternoon, in the corridor outside the hearing room, 2 agents, who had been waiting since morning, took Victor Thane into federal custody. He did not resist. He did not speak. He had the look of a man who had spent 40 years building a structure around a single justification, and had finally watched the justification fail to hold the weight he had placed on it. He would not be the last person the drive brought down. He was the first. Mara sat in the parking structure outside the federal building for a long time. November air moved through the open window without agenda, just temperature. Just the season moving through the world without reference to the past 11 days, or the past 12 years, or the morning. In 2011, when a man went out on what she was told was a routine resupply and did not come back, she held the dog tag in her hand. She thought about Eli, not the way she usually thought about him, braced and managing the edges, but openly. She let him be present in the way the dead are present when you stop protecting yourself from them. The laugh that arrived before the joke. The way he read with his finger tracing the line, not from difficulty, but from the habit of giving words their weight. The last morning, his hand on her shoulder, the unremarkable ordinary of a goodbye she hadn't known was a goodbye. She thought about what Dorian had told her. He didn't go out there uncertain. He went out there decided. The difference between those two things was something she had spent 12 years refusing to look at directly. Because if Eli had known, if he had understood what the disclosure would cost and gone forward anyway, then his death was not something done to him. It was something he had chosen, and chosen things carried a different weight than inflicted ones. They required a different response. Not the sustained fuel of injustice, but something harder and quieter. Understanding. The decision to let his choice mean what he intended it to mean. She closed her hand around the dog tag and said, out loud to no one, and to him, I hear you. The knock came at 2:17 in the morning. Too short. A pause. 1. The old corpsman's signal, friendly through a wall. She hadn't heard it in 12 years. She stood in the kitchen with tea going cold on the counter. Then she went to the door. Dorian Kane stood in the hallway in civilian clothes that fit the way. Borrowed things fit people they weren't made for. He was carrying a box, the kind that federal evidence processing uses for non-case personal effects, marked Return Upon Release in the standardized font of bureaucracy that has no awareness of what it is returning or to whom. He set it on the table and stepped back, the way you step back from something that has always belonged to someone else and has simply been elsewhere for a while. She lifted the lid. A gold ring, slightly darkened at one edge from years of being carried against a body. A photograph, small, faded at the corners, 2 people standing in desert light, faces turned towards something outside the frame, both of them between one difficult thing and the next, but genuinely glad to be where they were. And a piece of paper, folded twice, in handwriting she recognized before she unfolded it, because she had been reading that handwriting since she was 23 years old. The note was addressed to Dorian. It said, If you find her, don't let her think I didn't choose. Tell her I knew the math and I chose her version of the future over mine. Tell her it wasn't sacrifice, it was arithmetic. And tell her I said to stop apologizing for surviving. I did what I did so she could. At the bottom, smaller, added after. She's going to want to go back to work eventually. Let her. Mara read it twice. Then she sat down on the floor of her kitchen with the photograph and the ring and the note, and she let it arrive, all of it, the full weight of 12 years and the truth beneath them, and she let it rain. Dorian sat across the room and did not speak and did not leave. He had lived 4 centuries. He understood that some things required a witness and nothing else. After a while, the rain crested. She dragged a sleeve across her face and laughed once, the short, involuntary sound of a grief that has finally reached the other side of itself. He would be furious I cried in front of someone, she said. He would get over it, Dorian said. They sat at the small table until dawn, talking about things with breath in them, coffee, how to sleep without the weight of the past sitting on your chest, the way a hospital hum can sound like safety some nights and captivity on others. Dorian slid an envelope across the table. Reinstatement offer, not to Duskfall, to Hargrove. The board wants you back. I broke protocol, she said. You saved 9, he said. Pick which math you want to live with. She didn't answer. Some decisions require mourning. Morning brought a call from Webb. "You should see this," he said. "South hallway." Hargrove Memorial's south hallway was crowded. Nurses in fresh scrubs. A janitor still in his night shift vest. A receptionist holding a phone she forgot to use. The frame on the wall had been updated. The glass now held three things: the flash drive on a small mount, the ring, cleaned and gleaming, set on a small hook, and a printed card in clean black type. For the ones who chose, the ones who stayed, the ones who came back. St. Matthew's Emergency Department. No speeches. Someone started a slow clap that never quite took. It gentled instead into that soft murmur of approval you feel more than hear. Mara stood a step back, close enough to stay, far enough not to be the center. Webb appeared beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "We're not done," he said. "Some of what we broke we'll try to rebuild. It always does. But there are eyes on it now. Better eyes because of what you did. Because of what all of us did," she said. He looked at the frame for a moment, then, "You coming back?" She looked through the ER doors at the bright hallway, the monitors, the ordinary courage of a triage nurse tying her hair back because the room had just taken a turn. "I promised a dying man I'd live where gunshots couldn't find me," she said. "It took me 12 years to understand. They can always find you, but so can the people who need you." She held up her hands. The scar lines were pale. The tremor was gone. These weren't made to sign non-disclosure agreements. They were made to stop bleeding. Webb nodded and left her with that. She went to HR with Webb and signed the kind of paperwork that makes a place yours again. The woman behind the glass looked at the name on the form, returning, recommitting. And Mara told her there was a difference between those two words. The woman wrote it down as if she intended to remember it. Shift started at 7. By 7:04, a man with a broken hand came in, still shaking. By 7:13, an elderly woman whose heart was behaving badly. By 7:22, a construction worker whose blood pressure had been trying to tell him something for years. The work wasn't dramatic. That's what made it matter. Small mercies stacked like bricks until a wall existed between the people inside and whatever was waiting in the dark. Near midnight, she paused at the medication station. The hum of the building had a quality she hadn't registered in a long time. Something that wasn't safety exactly, but wasn't captivity either. Something in between. Something like home. She touched the dog tag through her scrubs and felt, for the first time in 12 years, not the weight of a command but the warmth of a promise kept. Dorian appeared in the doorway, one eyebrow up. "Still here?" She finished charting, clicked save, gave him a look that had recently remembered how to tease. "Still alive." "Occupational hazard," he said. The trauma intercom opened above them. Multi-vehicle, ETA 6 minutes. All available staff to Bay 2. Everyone moved without being told. Mara pulled her gloves on. She felt the old readiness arrive, the familiar sharpening of everything. And alongside it, for the first time in a very long time, something she hadn't trusted in years. Not the absence of grief or fear or the weight of everything that had brought her here, but something that could exist alongside those things without being diminished by them. She took her position at Bay 2. The ambulance doors opened. She whispered it, not to the room, not to the patient, not to the agents or the institutions or the machinery of consequence that had spent 12 years trying to locate her and had finally had to reckon with what it found. To him, to the man who had done his arithmetic 12 years ago and gotten it exactly right. "We're good, Eli. I'm home." The gurney came through. Her hands were already